The story begins with 3 hunters in the woods led by a man named Dale Burrows. After missing a shot at a rabbit, Dale was desperate to make a kill, so he ran after it towards the edge of a cliff. There, our protagonist Ryan snuck up from behind and grabbed Dale's neck with one arm. Dale asked if it was money that Ryan wanted, but Ryan squeezed tighter as he called out a name for him to remember. Dale immediately remembered his past crime, but it was too late. Ryan tossed him over the cliff where he died on impact. That night, Ryan relived the memories of masked gunmen from his past. When he woke up, he began cleaning his guns in preparation for what he had to do. Later, Ryan sat at a diner where the waitress asked where he was headed next. When she realized he was headed to a small town named Hope, she looked at him with pity since the town was overrun by a notorious biker gang. Moments later, Ryan drove into Hope and stopped at the general store for some supplies. There he met the owner named Kirby, who seemed to be on edge. Ryan asked if there was anywhere he could stay, so Kirby directed him to a motel run by a woman named Darcy. Meanwhile, the FBI was investigating the murders of 2 preteen girls, naming Dale Burrows as their primary suspect. The lead agent Sutton called for surveillance on their suspect until another agent broke the news that Dale was already dead. When they visited the coroner, the man explained that Dale had been strangled before falling to his death, so Sutton figured it was done by a mystery vigilante they were chasing. Back in Hope, Ryan arrived at the hotel where he finally met Darcy. Darcy tried to find out what he was doing in such a small town, but Ryan simply paid for 2 nights and wouldn't give away any more information. Later that day, one of the biker gang's prospects was about to shoot an innocent dog when Ryan stepped in and beat some sense into him. However, before he could permanently scar him, the rest of the gang appeared, and Ryan came face to face with Drake, the leader of the gang. Drake intervened and rescued the prospect, then he warned Ryan that they would continue their little standoff later. That night, Drake told his little brother Rex to head to their meth lab and check on the prospect. When Rex arrived at the lab, everything seemed to be in order, so figured they could make their next shipment soon. Just then, the prospect informed Rex that Ryan was staying at Darcy's motel, so Rex planned to go teach him a lesson. When he arrived at the motel, Darcy tried her best to stop him from looking through her records, but Rex held a gun to her and threatened her to cooperate. He then looked through the records to see which room Ryan was in, but Ryan snuck up behind him and knocked him out. Darcy warned Ryan not to harm Rex since he was Drake's younger brother, but Ryan ignored her warnings and dragged him away. Later, Rex woke up strapped to the hood of his car, so he insisted he didn't do anything to Darcy. Ryan then explained that he wasn't there because of that, and it was actually because he had killed a little girl. Rex warned Ryan that his brother would raise hell if anything happened to him. But Ryan simply wished him a safe trip as he set the car to run into a nearby building and explode. That night, Drake was informed about Rex, so he insisted on going to the crash site. There, the sheriff arrived and tried to calm Drake down so he wouldn't wreak havoc, but Drake reminded him that he could do whatever he wanted. After that, the sheriff returned to his deputy, Hedge, who was also his son, and warned him to stay out of it so the town could stay safe. Later, Ryan returned to the hotel where he told Darcy that Rex had been taken care of. Darcy warned him that he had to leave town since Drake was practically the mayor and they were all just paying rent. When Ryan asked why she hadn't left, she revealed that her husband had tried to get them out and he was killed for it. At this, Ryan tried to leave so he wouldn't cause her any trouble. But Darcy remembered how he protected her and told him he could stay. The next day, Darcy was shopping at the general store when Deputy Hedge showed up to ask some questions. Hedge noticed the scar and asked if Ryan had beat her, but Darcy joked that she would be in the ICU if he did. Meanwhile, Agent Showdown got word of Rex's death and figured it was their vigilante again. When they realized Rex is Drake's brother, they figured Drake would never let his brother's killer leave town alive. Back in Hope, Kirby got a visit from the prospect and a gang member named Crab. They grabbed him and took him to see Drake, who tasked him while finding everything out about Rex. Just to make sure he knew what would happen if he failed, Drake ordered his men to cut Kirby's hand. Later, the gang loaded up their trucks with a large shipment of meth while Ryan watched. On the way, one of the trucks had a flat tire, and when the driver stepped out, Ryan roughed him up and told him to start walking. Ryan then set the truck on fire and destroyed all of the drugs. After hearing the news, the prospect informed Crab that they had a huge problem. Crab then reported to Drake that their trucks had gotten jacked and it wasn't by the police. Meanwhile, Kirby tried to snoop through Ryan's car when Ryan showed up and caught him. Kirby claimed he was just checking out the car's model and the men went inside to talk. Ryan asks about Drake and the gang, so Kirby informs him of a rundown boat that Drake uses as his second office. Kirby then explains that the gang are asking him questions and he has to keep them off his back. So Ryan tells him to do what he needs to do to survive. Just then, Kirby notices Crab outside and warns Ryan that he's a sergeant in the gang. Unfazed, Ryan heads out to meet him and the two men start punching it out. Ryan easily has the upper hand and is able to bring Crab to his knees, but instead of killing him, he lets him go. Later, Drake meets with the sheriff to find out who burnt their trucks. The sheriff then informs Drake that Ryan was a cop from Dallas who went off the reservation years ago. At this, Drake slides the sheriff some money to keep quiet and make sure no other cops get involved. Meanwhile, Ryan heads down to the dock to check out the boat Kirby described. As he prepares his guns to go in, Deputy Hedge shows up and warns that Ryan will die if he tries to attack at that moment. Instead, he asks Ryan to give him some time to bring in some reinforcements. At this time, Ryan returns to the motel where he finds Darcy drinking next to pictures of her dead husband. Darcy asks Ryan what happened to his family, so he says they were executed because of a biker turf war he was investigating at the time. Meanwhile, Drake and his men ambush Kirby and accuse him of making friends with Ryan. Kirby insists that he didn't have any information on Ryan except that he was a former cop, so Drake simply tells him that he chose the wrong side. The next morning, Deputy Hedge discovers Kirby's body hanging from a tow truck. When news breaks out, Darcy and Ryan head to the scene to confirm it's true. Darcy grabs Hedge's gun, hoping to get revenge, but Hedge manages to talk her down. However, Ryan drives off to do it himself. After, Hedge heads down to the station where he notices Drake leaving the sheriff's office. He then praises the sheriff for finally involving the feds, but the sheriff had no idea what he was talking about. Moments later, Agent Showdown interviewed the sheriff and asked what he knew about Rex's death, but the sheriff claimed it was an accident and refused to give up any information. Meanwhile, Crab and some other gang members were playing pool at a club when Ryan showed up. Crab ordered his men to take Ryan down, but Ryan single-handedly fought off all the men, saving Crab for last. Moments later, he dragged Crab's unconscious body into the trunk of his car and prepared to drive off. Later, the prospect reported to Drake that there was still no sign of Crab when they suddenly heard a noise outside. Ryan set Crab on fire as he drove off, and all Drake could do was watch as Crab burned to death. Angered, Drake ordered for everyone to be killed. Meanwhile, Ryan sat in his car remembering what had happened all those years ago. He had thrown a backyard party for his wife and son when 3 gunmen in clown masks suddenly showed up and began shooting. Everyone was gunned down, including Ryan, but he managed to survive. After burying his family, Ryan asked a fellow cop where he could find the men responsible. From then, Ryan began tracking the men and taking down anyone involved along the way. In the prison, Agent Showdown goes to see Hedge, who explains that the sheriff is afraid of Drake. After Drake took over the town, he introduced guns and meth, and the sheriff was powerless to stop him. Now Drake and his gang were loading up to hunt Ryan. That night, Darcy heard a noise outside and grabbed a gun to protect herself, but Ryan told her to hide behind the front desk and wait for his signal to turn the lights off. 2 gang members entered the motel, and when they got closer, Darcy turned the lights off, allowing Ryan to quickly take care of the men. After, they ran outside to escape but got ambushed by the rest of the gang, who knocked Ryan out as they hauled Darcy into the back of a van. The next morning, Hedges and Agent Showdown checked out the hotel and discovered that Darcy was gone. However, when Hedge tried to reach the sheriff on the comms, there was no answer. At the same time, Ryan was tied up as Drake's men parade Darcy in front of him, threatening to hurt her. The men take her away while she screams for help. Then Drake tells Ryan they have a score to settle. When Drake leaves, the prospect takes over and brags about all the things he plans to do to Darcy. However, Ryan manages to break out of his constraints and take him out. He then goes through the rest of the ship, bulldozing anyone who dares to stand in his way. After taking out the men, he searches the ship and finds Darcy tied up in a room alone. Meanwhile, Hedge heads home to look for the sheriff and finds him dead on a table with a gun in his hand. After Agent Showdown apologizes for his loss, but Hedges insists that all his dad did was hand him a promotion. He then states they will need an army to take down Drake's men, so Agent Showdown shows him they have already got one. Back on the ship, Ryan and Darcy try to find their way out when they run into Drake, who's finally ready to face Ryan. Ryan tells Darcy to hide while he takes care of Drake himself. There, Drake reveals that he was one of the masked clowns at the barbecue that day, but it took him a while to remember who Ryan was. He then states that Ryan already killed his brother and asks to call them even, but Ryan says his only mistake was not killing Drake first. At this, the men begin to fight it out, and this time Ryan struggles to take Drake down. However, he eventually overpowers Drake and punches him till he goes unconscious. Ryan then turns his back on him to check on Darcy, giving Drake a chance to stab Ryan in the back. But he suddenly gets shot in the head as Agent Showdown finally shows up to do his job. After this, the police take over and wrap up the crime scene, but when Ryan tries to leave, Agent Showdown pulls a gun on him. However, Showdown lowers his gun and warns Ryan that even though he won't arrest him today, Ryan will eventually get someone like Darcy hurt. Later, Ryan packs up to leave, so he says his last goodbye to Darcy and drives off to hunt down the rest of the men.